I want to start this video off by welcoming all the new people who are here from seeing one of my previous videos. If you got here and scrolled through my Instagram or my YouTube, you'll notice that before like a month ago, this wasn't the kind of content I was doing. There was the occasional travel vlog or mini doc, but generally my main content was hype. So what inspired this change? I've always been a curious person. I like to say that I am a general nerd. I've spent more time on Netflix watching documentaries than TV shows, and my YouTube history is probably filled with thousands of hours of video essays by now. So dedicating many hours of my time into researching niche topics isn't new to me. This particular focus on Caribbean history and Caribbean philosophy came into sharper focus after the pandemic. I'm sure we've all had our lives affected in some major way by the pandemic so far. For me, it meant that pretty much everything I spent my time doing before stopped. All my video and photo gigs dried up, the gym closed, going to the office wasn't even an option. This left me with a lot of free time and I guess a lack of purpose in a sense. A friend of mine recommended a book to me after one of our many existential conversations about what to do now that life doesn't exist anymore. That book was How Europe Underdeveloped Africa by Walter Rodney, where he outlines the exploitation of Africa by Europe in a refreshingly pragmatic light, focusing not on the moral injustices of slavery but on the economics. Rodney posed a serious question right at the beginning. What is development, and conversely, what is underdevelopment? Investigating the answers to those questions is probably what most influenced me down the path to be making these videos right now. But another takeaway from those books is the fact that one of the most influential books on African development and post-colonial theory was written by a young Caribbean man. So I dug deeper into the region's history in search of more instances of influential figures and found people like Eric Williams with Capitalism and Slavery and Frantz Fanon with The Wretched of the Earth, both also critical books in the world of post-colonial thought. I really wondered what other great Caribbean works I may have missed in my formal education. Eventually, a clearer picture started to form. The linkages between the Caribbean and the struggle for post-colonial freedom were clear and inescapable. I revisited people like Marcus Garvey and his philosophies with a new context. I was inspired by the internationally influential activists and revolutionaries like Stokely Carmichael and a man like Maurice Bishop. But in the midst of all this research, a few thoughts kept coming back to me. Why am I studying all this history? When am I ever going to use it? What is history for? Most people I asked this question while researching for this video answered with the usual, you have to study your history so you don't make the mistakes of your past. But there's more to it than that. The notion that the past only contains mistakes and atrocities that we must strive to distance ourselves from seems to be a viewpoint that's gaining traction, but it's pretty incomplete and ignorant of the volumes of collective knowledge that history has to offer. History should use the past to inform the present and therefore the future. Though things may be changing now, for many years the importance of Caribbean history was overlooked. Often scholars thought that the region was just too small or that the scope of its history related only to slavery, but I believe Caribbean history to be not only important to us here in the region, but to be crucial in understanding world history. The Caribbean's history is forged from the amalgamation of influence from the indigenous people who first inhabited it to the Africans and Europeans and Asians and all other people who ended up here during its most significant period as a backbone of the early modern world economy. In the effort to look back at history to inform future change and progress, the Caribbean offers a unique perspective on the notions of citizenship, individual freedom, collective liberation, and nation building. Nation building in the Caribbean required much more work than just the first phase of choosing a name and designing a flag and choosing a national bird. The more important and more challenging second phase required a focus on economic justice, social justice, economic democracy, and the inclusion of historically marginalized communities. And this second phase of development is what history is for, to me. The 1960s to 80s saw many strides in the direction of tangible social and economic change in the Caribbean. The number of independent states grew from 3 in 1960 to 16 in 1983. In that time, you saw formation of things like the West Indian Federation, the Caribbean Development Bank, the Grenadian Revolution, and all of this against the backdrop of the Black Power movement and Pan-Africanism spreading throughout the world. But this desire for reform was met with great opposition. Those in charge villainized anyone who challenged the status quo and often used force to maintain their power. From that side, we saw things like the banning of pro-black literature in Jamaica, to a point where you could go to jail for owning a copy of the autobiography of Malcolm X. Legislation was passed like the Dread Act in Dominica, which made it legal to kill any dread on sight. Many of the Caribbean's prominent activists were banned from traveling to other countries in the region to speak. Some of them were even killed to stop their message. Right now, globally, we're poised for an era of change. A lot of us can feel it and a lot of us are anxious because we don't know what to do. Now is the time to bridge that gap and build on the work done by those before us, to create a guide on how we move forward into freedom and sovereignty, to know ourselves as individuals and as a society, to act outside of colonial thinking, to navigate the world on our own terms. So these videos are to share what I learned and to encourage a deeper investigation into our collective history. Already in the last 3 weeks of videos, I've seen a community form, and I've had discussions in my comments and in DMs with people from all over the region about topics that I never thought would be important in my life. But that was just me being ignorant. And ignorance continues to be to the bliss and to the benefit of the privileged. History should work against that. Sources of inspiration for these videos are people like Lou from Freetown, who basically does a free Caribbean philosophy lecture every Sunday. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have somebody like Hilary Beckles. You can find most of his stuff on YouTube, specifically on the UETV page. I'll add some more links to articles and stuff I read for this and anything else I think you should check out in the YouTube description. Yeah, let's talk some more in the comments or in DMs, and be sure to like and subscribe and all that, and I'll see you next week.